So let's jump right in then. Tonight we are joined by Jeffrey Leiken. He's presented over 1,000 keynote and youth development workshops at conferences, camps, and schools on four different continents, including a TED Talk, guest lecturing at Stanford University, and offering parent ed programs locally as well. So you might have gotten to see him before at your school. He also has a private practice where he uses his unique mentoring methodology to help adolescents grow into thriving adults. And he's here to share with us more on those three stages that I mentioned. We also have with us Vanessa Robbins. We're so excited to have her here. She's a Marin Academy sophomore. She's also a youth ambassador with Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships, and she'll be sharing the youth perspective this evening. So let's dive right in. Jeffrey, the stage is yours.
All right. Hello. So my name is Jeff Leiken. I really appreciate the opportunity to get a chance to chat with you for the next 45 minutes or so and share with you a lot of my observations of 35 years of working with adolescents and really seeing these distinct stages that they go through. And I very specifically want to make sure that as I do this, I'm not just giving you a bunch of theory, but actually getting into some of the actual details of things that you can be doing, specifically the relationship as a parent when oftentimes it can be very strained with a teenager for them to want to continue to be open and hearing your opinions. But I'm going to give you some of the things that I've learned and realized from watching what works over the years to maintain being a person who your teenager will continue to listen to, talk to, and weigh your opinions heavily. So let me go ahead and get the presentation started here. I'm just going to start my screen share. And there we go. Okay, so the presentation, of course, as you read in the promo material, is called the Three Stages of Adolescence. And it's really the three am I questions, and I'll explain what I mean as I get into this. So I think, and I defined adolescence as the moment in time when a person stops just being a child, but they're not yet an adult. And the significance of this is that for some people, that time period is relatively short and contained between about 12 and 18 years old. Other people can go on in one way or another living like an adolescent for much of their lives and stuff. But mostly in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the teenage years, the middle and high school years, since I know that most of the parents on this call tonight, that's really where your sons and daughters are at this point. So as they're going through all the physical changes and stuff, I specifically, as I addressed earlier, really want to make sure that I talk to you about the parents' role, how you can support your teenagers are going through these particular years. So you'll notice several times in the presentation, I'm going to sort of stop what I'm doing and just speak directly to you as parents as we go through this. And what I observe are these really three distinct stages that happen. And I'm going to go in depth, so you don't have to get lost in the first slide around this, but there's the awakening that there's this social world that they have to learn how to survive in, and that parents can't do it for them. There's a stage of life that starts around 16 years old where they begin to ask these identity questions. Who am I? What do I want for my life? What direction do I want to go with my life? And then there's the final stage, which is where they get into asking the question about, am I really ready to move into my adult life? So, okay, here's how I think of it from the model of work that I do. I think of it that in the beginning, we as parents really get to curate all the messages that our kids get in life about right and wrong, good and bad. So quite literally, the first voice they hear when we're holding them as a baby, and then, the caregivers, the grandparents, whoever we bring in, we're the ones who teach them about put your napkin on your lap, say please and thank you. Everything they know, they learn from us. What happens then is they begin to grow and become more involved in the larger world, and they begin hearing these other voices of influence in their life, that what I refer to as the second voice. And it begins as early as the first childcare that you put them in, or daycare, or preschool, where they meet other children and they learn different words and people behave in different ways. And of course, by the time they're in middle school, they've been exposed to media, social media, many of their peers, teachers, coaches, other parents, other families. And what happens is in the life of a child is they get oftentimes these conflicting messages about what's the appropriate way to behave. So what happens in the life of a teenager when they say, okay, I'm in this situation right now. I know that my parents want me to handle it this way, but I'm getting all these other opinions out here that are saying I should handle it this way. And these things come in conflict with each other. And that really, in a way, defines a lot of the inner struggle of an adolescent is really deciding, like, what is it that I'm going to believe? What am I going to do? What I think is right and wrong. So what I did in my own practice was I built what I eventually came to think of as a model where I am a third voice in their life. I'm not their parent, so they don't have the emotional attachment expectation that they oftentimes feel with parents, but I'm also not their friend because their friends oftentimes either don't know anything more about life than they do, so they're not really well positioned to give great advice. But their friends also tend to tell them what they want to hear, which isn't necessarily what they need to hear. So I'm sharing this with you because I want you to understand the angle of the stories I'm going to share with you is this is a mentoring model. It's really a coaching and mentoring model. My premise is that there's nothing wrong with the kids that I work with. They do not need to be a patient in psychotherapy. In fact, about 80% of the families I work with have gone that route before, and eventually they arrive at working with me. And you're going to hear stories in this of how the kids I work with can text me, call me anytime that they want. And it's very real. So I'm going to use very real examples with you. I think of a third voice as the kids are growing up, they really start to become the CEO of their own life. And so who sits at the table of advisors for them, right? And I like to think of myself and my own practice as one of the people who's one of the advisors. I don't tell them what's the right thing to do, but I try to give them a lot of information that helps them to make really well thought out decisions. Ideally, in all of our kids' lives, there's going to be a lot of responsible adults who you trust who are going to be advisors in their life. But let's face it, they're also getting a lot of influence from some of their peers who are not necessarily the best advisors in life, which is why I think it's so critical we as parents maintain this very strong presence of credibility. So you're going to see text messages like this in this presentation because these are from real teenagers just like yours. In fact, when I look at this list, three of the five are from right here in Marin County, a couple are on the East Coast. But these are the kind of messages that I get on an ongoing basis from middle school, high school, college age kids. And these are the things that are going on in their lives. Okay, so that's my intro. That's the perspective that I'm coming at this from 35 years of working with teens and observing this. And what I've noticed is starting around middle school years, which also equates to puberty. Their bodies start to go through their changes and their brain starts to go through their changes. And the other thing that is oftentimes really, I don't think taken seriously enough or we really prepare them for is their social world also goes through a puberty of its own. I refer to it as a social puberty. So when they're young, when our children are young, and I have two myself, at this point, I have a 19-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter. My 13-year-old's in seventh grade, actually goes to middle school, public middle school at Miller Creek Middle School here in Marin. Um, is that when they're young, their friendships are pretty much based on two things, either proximity, next door neighbor, my parents' best friend have, a son and they like to come over and we're friends. Somebody sits at my table in school or activity. We play on the same soccer team together. We like to do the same things. There's no consideration of how popular is this person? How does it look in the world, in the eyes of others if I hang out with that person? It's just friends or just whoever's fun, whoever's close by. When they hit the middle school years, that all changes. And that's why the first stage of adolescence is really all about there's this complicated social world. And I have to figure out how to survive in this social world, not just survive, but get to a place where I feel secure. Because until a teenager feels secure in their social world, that insecurity, that instability that they experience is going to be with them almost 24/7. And I'll tell you, as a parent, if you have a son or daughter who is really struggling to feel secure, solid ground, really well connected in their social world, and you come in and you start talking to them about do your homework, you need to get up and do your volunteer hours or whatever, you should be doing more activities. Yeah, they may listen to you, but underneath the surface, what they're really thinking about is, I just want to get on my phone and see what everybody's doing so I can make sure that I don't miss out. Okay, so what does social puberty lead to? It's things like this. I refer to it as like social politics, who you can talk to, who you can't talk to, what music you can listen to, how do you dress? And it changes rapidly, right? That's so last week or whatever. Social hierarchies. Instead of there just being groups of kids who hang out on the playground in fourth grade, by middle school, there's, who's popular, who's not popular, who are the nerds, and there's, social hierarchies. The beginnings of romantic relationships. some of which, is really like intense feelings that people will start to have because they're biologically ready to have that. And then all of a sudden, they're dealing with like very intense feelings. They're dealing with jealousies, resentments, people cheating on them, people talking about them behind their back, and it gets really intense for young teenagers to go through this. Social power games. Okay, this was always going on when all of us were growing up, all of us parents were growing up. It's at a different level now. And it's at a different level now because if you think about it, like I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, right? I went to school, I came home, we had the wired phone, attached to the wall. And unless somebody called me or I called somebody, my high school life was left behind at high school. I'd pick it up again the next morning at 8 o'clock. So 3:30 on, I was free, right? Now our kids are 24/7 because of the phones, because of all the socializing, the social politicking that happens on their phones. And they also deal with all these power games that happen. So, for example, like you can ask your son or daughter about Snapchat and what it means to be unread or on read, like knowing somebody, the person knows you sent them a message, but they're not even opening it, or the person read the message and they're not responding to you. Um, the little snarky comments that come along where, maybe you're upset about something and you say something to a friend and the person's like, it's not that deep, which is just totally dismissive and talking down to you. Or, someone will say, well, I mean, you can come if you want because you weren't invited, but yeah, you can come if you want. Well, how do you take that as a kid? And these are like really hurtful, very complicated things that kids deal with. Finding out that there's a group chat that was set up and you're left out of it, or sleepovers happened and you weren't invited. These are all the things that start to happen. And what it leads to is pressure and stress. So, what do we know about the pressure and stress of adolescence? Well, some of it is what we all dealt with, wanting to look cool enough, wanting to fit in, wanting to be included. It's amplified now, as I said earlier, because of the endless presence of social media and the influence of social media, not just literally the having it, but the influence of it. There's a lot of nastiness. There's a lot of like really cruel things that go on right now that are really beyond the bounds of things that really used to be socially acceptable when a lot of us were growing up, and certainly where a lot of us were growing up. So, what happens with a young teenager is they have this first realization of their life as a teenager, which is I have to be able to do this on my own. When I was a little kid, my mom could call the school and say, this child's making fun of me, and the teacher would call them in and they'd resolve it. No way, when I'm 15 years old or I'm 13 years old, am I going to have my parents call the teacher, okay? Or call another mom saying, hey, how come Charlotte wasn't invited to the birthday party? Like, I have to figure this out on my own. And the deep underlying question that's going on inside of a teenager going through this first stage of adolescence is, am I blank enough? And the blank is whatever they feel needs to be on that checklist that they can check the box that they are enough of. So it would look something like this. Am I smart enough, pretty enough, attractive enough, interesting enough, funny enough? The sort of overarching term, which is transcended the decades, is cool enough that people finally are accepting me and I know it inside myself. And this is the key that they want to get to is I know I'm a cool enough person. I know I'm attractive. I know I'm smart enough that no matter where I go, I know I'm going to be okay in the social world. And until they get to that point, these questions are going to be underneath the surface, making them feel insecure. The more they depend on the outside world to validate them, the less secure they're going to be on the inside. So the more they need compliments, you look good. Oh, that was really, you have a great voice or whatever it is, that they're getting the affirmation of, and they need that to feel okay, the less secure they are. When they get to a point where they say, I know that I can do this. I know I'm good enough. I know I'm a good friend. I know I'll be okay. Then they're fine. And because it takes so long to get to that point for so many of them, this is also the stage where they become highly susceptible to what this organization particularly focuses a lot on, like substance use, being peer pressured to use substances, being peer pressured to hook up and become sexually active, even at a young age when they don't necessarily want to be. Using marijuana, using nicotine. There's so many teenagers who I work with who tell me about their addiction to these Zins that they put in their mouth, which is nicotine, the vaping, sneaking out at night, not because they want the thrill of excitement, but because they want their friends to think them cool. Because if you're having a sleepover and somebody wants to do it and that person's more popular and you go, no, it's a bad idea, you might lose your standing in the social group. So they become much more susceptible to these things. And many teenagers, when they're insecure in themselves and haven't really thought through this, will tend to think of almost everything on this list as just a given. It's not a matter of, if I'm going to do these things, it's just a matter of when, because of course you have to do it in order to, as this one 14-year-old girl who lives in Florida who I work with said to me, I do these things because I want to be relevant. And if I'm not relevant, no one's going to invite me, no one's going to talk about me, no one's going to want me. And that desire in her case to be relevant is the thing of, am I whatever it takes so that people want to continue to include me? Okay. We all went through that stage. And some people, parents listening to this maybe had a really difficult time. You watched a group of friends, and all of a sudden you showed up at school and they didn't save a place for you at the table and they started having sleepovers and not including you. These are things that have been going on forever. Okay. But I'm reminding you when it's happening, it's really, really difficult times. So, how do we as adults, and in this case as parents, support our kids as they're going through this particular time? So, I'm going to introduce a couple of concepts I think are really valuable. The first one is many teenagers go into this stage of life with this attitude of things like trying alcohol, trying marijuana, being sexually active at a young age are just givens. It's just what everybody does. I've had a lot of kids who say to me things like, well, I mean, I grew up, watching my parents open a bottle of wine every night, and I just know that's what grown-ups do is drink alcohol. So they get this idea that it's just what everybody does. It's a way of showing I'm not a little kid anymore. One concept you can begin introducing to your sons and daughters at this age is treat everything in life as a matter of if I'm going to do those things, not when. Because the moment that you make something an if, now you have agency, you have power in your life that you get to choose. If it's a when, you really don't get a choice of if you're going to do these things. It's just a matter of when you're going to do it. Make things an if. And I use the word power because power appeals deeply to an adolescent. What will make you feel more secure in the world than to feel powerful? If you think about that. So teaching them choice is power. This is not we're preaching at them and lecturing them. This is we're giving them something aspirational to aspire to. I want to be more powerful, so I'm going to make things a choice in my life. So start teaching them the concept of if. Okay. Another thing, this is a really cool and fun activity to do with your kids is sit down at a table, take out a piece of paper. I actually have whiteboards in my office. Actually, locally, I have an office in Mill Valley. I have these two big whiteboards, and almost every one of my clients has seen me take it out and draw this circle with them. And I say, "We tell me about all the different people in your life." And the way I lay it out for them is in that inner circle is your closest friends. This literally is your inner circle of life, the people physically closest to you, the people who have the most access, the people you share the most with. And these are your best, best, best friends. These are people who you trust implicitly. If you say to this person, I want to share something with you, but you have to keep it between us, they say yes, it'll stay between you. Okay. There's a second circle, and the second circle, you're really, really good friends, people who you really like, you feel really close to them, but they're not yet inner circle. They haven't gotten to that point where you would just share everything. Okay. Third circle, people you socialize with, they're friends. You have fun being with them. I oftentimes describe it to a teenager as like certain people that, you're happy to go to something at their house, but you wouldn't necessarily want them at your house. You're happy to take them with you in your car, but you wouldn't want to be driving in their car, like people like that. And you keep going out in these circles, and eventually you just get to the point where there's people who are classmates that you're friendly with, or somebody you worked with at a summer job that you say hi when you see them out at Starbucks one day, but you're not really friends, but they're in your social world. Okay. And what example I use with them is for me, my best, best, best friends call me 2 o'clock in the morning. I answer the phone. They say, Jeff, I need help. Can you come over? I say, I'm on my way. I don't even ask why. People in the second circle call me 2 o'clock in the morning. I answer the phone. They say, Jeff, I need help. Can you come over? I say, why? What's going on? 99% chance I'm still going to go, but I'm probably going to ask what's going on. People in the third circle call me 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't wake up because it doesn't ring because they're not on my approved list of people to get through my do not disturb. So I explain it this way because what we're teaching them is having boundaries with different friends. Don't trust people with information if they have not proven that they are trustworthy. Don't make plans with somebody who has not demonstrated to you that they are reliable, that they're going to follow through with the plans and they won't just flake on you because they don't feel like going or because something better comes along. And this is a way that you start at a young age of teaching your kids to recognize not all friendships are equal. And you really have to start to notice things and character traits in different people to determine how close do I want this person in my life? What boundaries do I want to have with this particular person? What are topics I just wouldn't share with this particular person, but I would share with somebody who's in the inner circle? It's really fun to do this, and you can do this with your sons and daughters. As I said, I'll sit down and I actually like color coded. I have like different colored markers and stuff, and we move people around, and we'll come back and revisit it because somebody has, who they thought was trustworthy turns out to not be, and then they have to decide, am I going to talk to that person, try to resolve this? But it's a really kind of cool way that you can teach your kids to start thinking with more maturity and sophistication about their social life. So that's the key of sophistication. One of the other things that you find as parents is sometimes your kids are going to make social choices that inside of you just make you like your stomach tightens up. You don't want them hanging out with that kid. You know that person is bad news. But a lot of the times as teenagers, you really do have to let them go through and figure this stuff out on their own. So this was just a text message. This was a 15-year-old girl. She lives on the East Coast. And she sends me this message, and this is referring that the name that's blocked out in yellow. And this girl is somebody that when they're together to one, this girl's really nice and fun. But the moment there's a bigger crowd, the girl is like really dismissive, can be sarcastic, puts her down because the girl's a social climber. So what she's realized is, one to one, the girl is fine with me, but as soon as the girl's out in the world, she's more concerned about an impression on others than on how I feel. So about 6 months has gone by, and I get this message from this 15-year-old girl that I'm rethinking missing her, and maybe I'm more mature now. Maybe she's more mature. Maybe we can be friends again. And when I get this message from her, in my mind, I'm like, you're just making a huge mistake. Like it's all going to happen all over again. But I can't tell her that. And okay, I could, but there's missing a golden opportunity. And it makes me start to just be one of these people who acts like I know better than she does. So instead, what I'm saying to you as parents is sometimes the best you can do is just help them think through a situation, not tell them what to do or not do. Not say, I don't want you hanging out with that person. More sit there with them and say, it's interesting. What do you think would be different now? What is the evidence that, she might behave different? What are you going to do if you hang out with her and she starts to do what she did in the past, where you're around a group of people and then she makes sarcastic jokes about you or makes fun of you? Like, what are you going to do? And by that, you're not telling them it's a bad idea. You're just preparing them. And it opens up dialogue also because if they say, well, I might say this, now you can say to them, I have a couple suggestions for you. Don't know if it's great. Don't know if they're going to work, but I have some suggestions of what you could say or you might want to consider saying. And so you'll notice on this list that I say to you, it's far more effective most of the time with teenagers to give them suggestions and options instead of advice. Advice suggests, I know better than you and I know the right way. Suggestions is, I've had a lot of life experience. I can tell you 5 different things that I've done in my life that have worked, have helped in situations like this. So I encourage as parents during this time, help them think through by asking really good questions, giving them suggestions and advice. Withhold your judgments because one of the quickest ways to turn a teenager off to sharing things with a parent is when they feel like if they tell you something about what a friend did, you're immediately going to judge the friend and and then you're not going to want the friend in the house anymore and they're going to go underground. They're just going to hide it from you. So don't be judgmental. Withhold your opinions unless they're soliciting them. And the only time that I break that is if somebody's really about to do something really high risk or dangerous, or there's a person or a situation that is just, I'm sorry, you can't be with that person. Okay. But otherwise, like with that girl I just showed you a text message, I just like, if you want to go do it, see what happens. And no surprise, by the way, it didn't work out. But she now learns that herself. The last thing is, as parents during this time, is think our kids need skills. They need to be more socially sophisticated. They need to be more socially savvy. One of the ways to teach skills to your kids is tell them stories from your own life. And sometimes the most effective way to do that is not telling a story. When I was in high school, there was this girl that I liked and this happened. But it's actually telling real world stories about what happened yesterday at work. You say to them at dinner, you're sitting around, you say, had a really interesting thing happen at work today. We have this new person that we hired, and some of the people don't really kind of rubs people the wrong way. And a couple people came to me and they wanted me to deal with it, and I thought about it like, should I have them deal with it? Should I not deal with it? If I'm going to deal with it, what should I say to the person? And so you introduce this stuff because a lot of times you'll find your teenager is actually going to listen to you and be like, well, what did you do? And how did it work? And at that point, you're kind of indirectly teaching them communication skills, relationship skills, social skills. You sharing stories about how somebody that was, part of your friend group and you just realize like the way this person's behaving and the choices they're making right now, I don't really want to be around it. So I've been distancing myself. But you begin to talk through these things that are parallels to what they're going to be experiencing, as opposed to, let me teach you a lesson right now, which oftentimes for teenagers is a real turnoff. But think, teaching them skills, helping them become more sophisticated and more savvy in their life. The more they have this, the more confident they will be, the more confident they are, the more secure that they'll be able to be in their social world, the more likely they will finally transition out of this stage. And I emphasize that because there's a lot of people who do not transition out of this stage, by the time they're 16 years old. There's people who go the rest of their life endlessly insecure, desperately trying to be seen and included in their social world. And it's really hard when somebody even continues this up until their college years to go into college feeling insecure about themselves. We want them to get to a point where they say, I know how to find my people. I know how to speak up for myself. I know how to recognize people who are not good for me. I know how to put boundaries up. I'm okay in the social world. That's where we want them to get to. Because no matter what, whether they resolve that or not, they're going to be at a certain point around 16 years old where they go into the second stage of adolescence. And the second stage is the stage of self-identity. It starts typically around 15 and a half to about 17 years old. Yes, there are people who start to have these questions at an earlier age. Mostly at that point, though, it's more of like an abstract concept to them, like, yeah, when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut or something. But typically by 15 and a half to 17, they're starting to have this realization, which goes like this. I'm my own person, and I'm capable of making my own decisions, and I can make my own opinions in life and independent of the family I grew up in, my religion, my peers, my community, my school, what everybody's told me about how I should vote, what I should believe, what I should do with my life. What do I actually believe? What do I want to vote for? What do I actually want to do with my life? So the deep underlying question that happens at this point is, who am I? And it's I do believe at this point it is brain development. Like there's a certain point where our brains are able to think enough through time that instead of just surviving their day-to-day social world, they start thinking about, how am I going to live in the bigger world, the planet Earth, over decades of my life. So at this time in life, it is. I actually I joke about this that I someday want to write a book called 16 because I've had, oh my gosh, so many parents over the years reach out to me, and the conversation starts with, my daughter is 16 years old, and up until recently, everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, they're seeing these dramatic changes. They're changing their friend groups, they're changing the way they dress, they're coming home and putting out all these radical ideas. They're dark and they're not as bright as they used to be. And I, tell parents all the time, they're in this who am I stage. Okay. What comes along with this also is they're typically also at the age where, both in terms of their own maturity, able to have these awakenings about life, but also just life experience, things actually start to happen to them that are very, very real and very hard to deal with. And the awakenings, these are the most common ones that go on at this particular age, is when a teenager around 16, 17 years old really comes to understand, we as adults don't have all the answers. We're not perfect. We can't protect them from everything in the world. And that's a really unsettling thing for a lot of kids to have to deal with because they've always had that default under, behind everything. No matter what, I've got this, solid ground I'll land on no matter what. And then they come to realize like my parents can't answer all these questions for me. They don't know what I'm going to do for a career with AI. They're trying to figure it out themselves, right? They can't solve my social problems for me. they begin to understand that life is impermanent. It's typically by this age that they have dealt with somebody, their own age who has died either through an accident. We've had a couple, really tragic, upsetting incidents that have happened even here in Marin County in the past year. Suicides happen. They're starting to deal with grandparents who are dying. Obviously, there's people this stuff can happen at a much younger age, but typically around the teenage years is when they're experiencing these things. This is the age where they start to really see that corruption exists, that there is actual favoritism in the world, that there's certain people who are going to get into certain colleges just because of what their family last name is or how much money somebody can donate. Teachers have favorites, coaches have favorites, and there's nothing that we can do about it. This stuff actually happens. There's corruption in the world. They start to understand the system is flawed, that just getting straight A's in calc class and AP physics and AP US history doesn't mean that they're actually going to be prepared for life. It just means that they got grades that'll go on a transcript, because the system is not really perfectly designed to prepare them for life. It just gives them an academic education. All these things start to happen in their life. They see bad things that happen to otherwise good people, and why would this happen? Why would it? My mom's best friend, who's only 42 years old and has been healthy her whole life, how could she be diagnosed with cancer? I mean, these are things that start to happen. And it's during this time that I start getting messages like these. These are very real messages, okay, that I'm sharing on the screen right now. The one that's on the left, that's a boy who grew up here in Marin, went to actually to Branson school, and he sends me this message. He was about 18 when he sent me this message. Jeff, I need change. I don't think I've been myself for the last couple of years. I feel like I have a lot of learning and growth to do. I knew who I was before, but now I'm in need of change and soul searching and tackling lots of issues. I don't know when I stop being me. Can you help with this? The one on the right was earlier this year. This is also a boy who is 18 years old, sent me this from college, and you see I'm getting it at 5:17 in the morning, so that he was up all night sending me this message. I'm having a hard time, Jeff. I'm like really sad right now. Nothing feels familiar. The world sucks. People are all effed up. I'm just not in a good space. I need to talk soon. And what I'm emphasizing showing you these messages because very frequently parents will have a son or daughter during this age of about 15 and a half to about 18 years old, and they'll start hearing things like this from them. And typically what we do is we go, oh my gosh, is my kid depressed? Do they need to be on medication? Do they need psychological treatment? My observation, I really want to emphasize this is not a sign that somebody's clinically depressed. It's typically a sign they're in the stage of life of trying to figure out who they are. How are they going to build a life for themselves as they're just overwhelmed by the understanding how complicated the world is and how messed up so many things are. And they get overwhelmed, and you start getting messages like this. One of the ways you'll know that your teen is in this stage is they'll start saying this line, I realized something. I literally had one earlier today, um, with a 18-year-old boy, 17 or 18, 17-year-old boy who on a call with me, in a FaceTime call with me, says to me, I realized something, Jeff. And he starts to tell me something that he realized by observing interaction going on between two of his friends and seeing this pattern of how they treat each other and realizing, like, wow, people do that to each other a lot. And I've been doing that and I don't want to do that anymore. And the way I respond is not like, good for you, yes, and like trying to tell him, oh, I know that too. What I do is I ask him questions, which I'll get into in a minute, of like, it's interesting that you realize that. So what do you do with that realization? How do you apply that to your life? It's a time to be asking questions. So what questions are they typically asking? What career do I want? What are my values? What life choices am I going to make? What do those life choices look like? Typically, it's these things. Where am I going to go to college? What am I going to major in? Where do I want to live? And by the way, the college thing is not just where am I going to go to college? For a lot of kids, it's an if question. If I'm going to go to college. There's many of them now who are deciding, I don't really don't want to do this, or I want to take a gap year, or longer before I go to college. And I emphasize this because in a place like Marin County, it's pretty much a given that kids are going to go to high school, use that transcript to apply to college and go to college. Nationwide in the United States, only 1/3 of American adults actually have a college degree. Okay, so it's something to understand also about some of the political dynamics that go on in this country. Place like Marin, certainly like Southern Marin, it's about 95% of the kids are going straight to college. Okay, or parents certainly are college educated. So some kids are asking the if question, not when. Where do I ever want to get married? Do I want to have kids? Who do I want to be in a relationship with? What are the things that I really care about? What do I believe? What am I going to vote for? Who am I going to vote for in my life? These are really significant questions for kids to be grappling with at this age. How do we then, as parents, start to support them? Again, I told you I always want to stop and make sure that I'm not just giving you examples, but also saying, as a parent, how do you respond? So the first thing is, again, resist telling them what to do. Instead, as much as you can, ask them questions that allow them to start thinking in a multidimensional way. So, like the boy today has the realization about the two friends and the way they treat each other and how he can be like that also. And I respond by, what do you think about that? What does that make you realize? What do you do with that realization? How do you want to apply that to your life so that, if 6 months from now somebody meets you, they would never be telling a story to me about you the way you just told about those two kids. That's like a future thing. It's like standing out in their future, getting them to think about about what are the things to do now so I can be the person I want to be then. Help them think through the impact of the choices. So, I'll use the gap year thing. If you do that, what happens when you try to go back to school after you've been out for a year and you haven't been studying? If you choose to not go to that school, but choose to go to this one, how are you going to present this to your parents, or what are you going to do about, still pursuing the career you want when they don't exactly have the major that you want, but you really want to go to that school? So I'm not telling them it's a bad idea. I'm just teaching them how to think through these things. Help them identify things that are really important about themselves. I'm just going to use the college example again because it's so common where I'll meet a teen who is already in college. I'll get the phone call from a parent or whatever that my kid did great through high school and all of a sudden in college they're struggling. And very often what I find is they look back on it and they realize they made a really bad choice about where to go to school. Certain kids would just go, I thought it'd be super fun to be at a big school, but I can't handle being in a class with 300 people. I thought I wanted to go to this very elite school that I was able to get into, but I got here and I realized it's just super competitive. It's stressful. I don't like the climate. I can't stand the winters, and I'm really struggling to be happy here. So by helping them identify important things about themselves, we really help them make better quality decisions. When you know yourself well enough, you're not going to put yourself in stressful environments. You're not going to put yourself in a climate you don't want to be in. If you really like the stimulation of a city, don't go to a school in rural Vermont. Go to a school closer to a big city. When it comes to making career choices, if you know that you do not do well working independently, being from home or whatever, it doesn't matter that the job's going to pay you better. Choose the one that you're going to be able to go into an office and you're going to be able to work with people and have lots of social interaction with people. Like, come to know yourself well enough that you make high quality decisions. And that's not me as a parent telling you what I want the answer to be. That's me because I've gotten to know you and I know this about you, but you haven't figured it out about yourself yet. Okay. And the last piece is supporting them on the experiences of things that they want to do. So, yes, there are a lot of kids who go through this identity stage and they try on 5 different identities. They go from dyeing their hair to shaving their hair to all of a sudden dressing very formally to now they're into country music. And you look at it, you go, okay, my kid's just going through it right now. There's that. But then there's also, they start to express a real interest in a particular field. And maybe people you can introduce them to who are in that field. You can help them get the internship or a job where they can start to get exposed to that. They have an interest all of a sudden in photography and, not just with their phone, but with the camera. And they ask you for the camera. It's absolutely, I encourage it. If you're really serious that you want to do this, I'll support you. We'll get you the camera. And, like anything, it's expensive. And sometimes I have parents who say, we'll pay for half of it. You have to pay us back over time, or as long as you're really going to use it, I'm happy to do this. But, what are you going to do with it more than just take pictures and post them, for your friends? How are you going to really do something with this? But you support their kids with this, with their interest with this stuff, because a lot of times it's only through experience that they really do come to understand for themselves this is really for me or this isn't for me. So I encourage parents to do that. Okay, so quickly moving along as I'm getting to the end of this, the last stage of adolescence is commitment stage. This typically shows up most dramatically when they're graduating college or starting into their adult life, whether a college degree or not, in getting a real job. And it's at this point where they realize up until now, really the only commitment I've had is to myself. The only person I have to watch out for is myself. When you're making a commitment to something bigger than yourself, you have to watch out for yourself, but also be responsible for others. Obviously, all of us as parents live this 24/7. It's never just about us. Every decision we make, we have to stop and think about, how does this affect my kids? If I spend this money here, will I have money to support them there? All that stuff. Well, for a lot of young adults, it really doesn't happen until they're about to start their career. Although I do see it when a lot of kids are going off to college also, where they've never been away from home before. And the question that they start to ask underneath the surface is, am I ready for this? Am I good enough for this? And the thing about this stage is this is a threshold. So there's nothing that we are going to do that's going to help them answer this question. The only thing that we can do is just be there on the outside to witness it. Giving them the encouragement helps for some people, but more than anything, they just have to go do it. Okay. So, am I ready for this? Am I good enough? So, I love this. This is from a girl, it's actually a TAM student. This is again for parents who are local here in Marin. When she was going off, and she graduated college, but there was a math class. She literally had to retake it 4 times because she failed it 3 times. So her confidence was not super high, but she got a job working in public relations and as a writer. She's incredibly talented, and she finally gets this job at this really cool PR firm. And this is the message I got from her the day that she was starting. And you'll see it was like at 6:40 in the morning. I had this message from her. I'm so nervous. I couldn't sleep last night. And all I say back is, "You've got this." Okay. She says, "I hope you're right." And I respond with, "I know I am. And soon you will too." And she writes back, "Thanks. And I'll call you tonight." But this is a very typical thing. Your kid's going to call you up. "I don't know that I can do this. I'm about to go to this audition. I'm trying to get into this repertory program or whatever. I'm going to my law school interview. I don't think I can do this. I'm starting my job." And all you say on the outside is, "You got this. You got this." So it's commitment. Am I good enough? That's the last stage. Okay. So these are the 3 stages. The first one, am I cool enough? How am I going to be secure in my social world? We teach our kids skills. We help them become more sophisticated and more savvy. Almost every client I have in my professional practice who's in middle school and high school, dominating conversations are about their social lives. How do I have better boundaries? How do I break up with this friend group? How do I ask somebody out? How do I deal with this friend who, left me out of plans and didn't include me? Why is it that, the boy likes her and not me? This is stuff that goes on, and it's teaching them skills to be more sophisticated and more savvy. And when they get to the point where they feel secure in themselves, they're beyond this stage. Okay. The next stage is, who am I? Starts again around 16 years old. And at that time is when we start asking the questions. Well, what do you do with that realization? What does this teach you about yourself? How do you use this information so you'll make better decisions for yourself because you know yourself better now than you did before? And the last stage is the stage of commitment. And once they've crossed that threshold of commitment, then they stand on their own as an adult. They know how to engage in the social world. They know they can handle themselves out there in the social world. They know they can find their people and make friends for themselves. They have a solid sense of who they are, so they'll make really high quality decisions for themselves. And they know that they can handle the challenges of life. Even when they make mistakes, they know inside them, I know that I can handle it, that I'm good enough and smart enough and resilient enough that I can handle these things, and I'm going to be okay in the world. So that is my presentation for you about the 3 stages. This is just real quick before I hand it over for the Q&A. My website, my evolutionmentoring.com. Obviously, I have a private practice. I work with teens and young adults all over, used to be all over the world. Since the pandemic, it's almost exclusively in North America now. But if you're interested, please reach out to me because this is what I do, and I'm happy to talk to you about how I work. It's obviously a very different practice. So thank you all for your time with this, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you, and I will look forward to getting into the Q&A part of this now. Okay, thank you.
No, I know everybody has questions because I have questions right now, and I'm gonna hold off on those, as hard as that is, and write them down, because I do want us to hear from Vanessa, and I want to call out that we've asked Vanessa, our youth speaker tonight, to do something a little bit different and a little more challenging. I think often those of you who have been here before know we have a youth perspective, and a young person has prepared something ahead of time. We've asked Vanessa tonight to do something a little different, which is simply to listen to what Jeff has to say and find the moments where something resonates or the ahas that Vanessa's picking up on. So I want to give you a shout out, Vanessa, for being so willing to do that on the spot, which is not easy. But it is so, so, so valuable. So I'll just turn that over to you. What has stood out for you, or what sort of reflections were you having during Jeff's presentation, Vanessa?
Hi, again, I'm Vanessa. I'm a sophomore at Marin Academy. Um, so I think a lot, or I have a page of notes, so I'm just gonna kind of go in order of his presentation. So I think the first point about the second versus the first voice, or the first voice versus the second voice, is that I feel like the second voice really came to me. I feel like really started picking up on that probably in middle school because I went to Hamlin, which is a private all-girls school in the city. And one thing about Hamlin is it's very like empowering. It's very like believe what you want and kind of like I always heard that voice and it was kind of always like stand up for yourself. And so that was kind of like an outside perspective that I was able to hear besides from my parents. So I think that like I think the second voice can have negative influences but also a very positive influence. And I think the third voice is also like a really good merge of the both of them and kind of like coming from that as a parent, as like not a friend or a parent, but like kind of like giving like one thing about me is my dad, he plays like really he plays a lot of tennis and I also play tennis. But one thing about me is for some reason I never he always tells me like, "Oh, put more spin on the ball, swing through." And I'm never end up taking that advice, but then when I hear it from my coaches, I do end up taking it. So, it's just that it's not that your kids aren't hearing you when it comes to advice, it's just they might need to hear it from someone else because it kind of is like, oh, that's my parent telling me like I'm not like yeah, it's just something in our head, but it's like they will eventually figure it out, I think. Um then so going back to stage 1, so I think the social thing everything Jeff said about the social thing completely resonated with me. I think that it was really interesting about how I feel like it was kind of like sixth grade for me that I really felt that social hierarchy start to develop. And there was so much more drama. It was like, what do you know? Like, who do you like? Who do you not like? And kind of just that. Um, and I feel like that was when I felt that change. And I think the most thing that I agree with the most was he said that if I could be dropped in any middle school, any high school in America, I could tell you the social group within about 5 minutes. It's just something that I'm not sure if every teenager is as perceptive, but it's just something that that I wouldn't classify myself as someone who's in the popular group, but it's just something that I feel like most teenagers are trained to see and trained to just pick out because like obviously the stereotypes aren't as real as in the movies, but they are there and people it's just in your head, so it's kind of like that. And then I think, like he was saying, about how social media does make everything a lot worse. And yeah, people do say it's not that deep or it's like come if you want. And so in middle school, I went to K through 8th school. So I had a very tight friend group. And so I was always planning things, inviting people to things, and being that person. And I always tried to include everything. But in high school, at the very beginning, I did struggle a lot because there were some times when I wasn't invited to things, and there was a group of people who I thought were like my best friends, but then I realized that they didn't invite me to something. And so it kind of just like was this big upset for me. And I think that was like really when I came into realizing like that you just kind of have to let go about that social thing. And that was really when I leaned on my parents for support because my mom, like she struggled in high school too. And she just kind of like was like, it'll always get better. And like at that point, I didn't think it would get better, but like it really did get better. Um, and then I think like the whole am I enough question is really like it does sum up that phase of life because I think that was when I was questioning, am I enough? Like, why do not these girls not like me? Like, is it something I'm doing or is it just them? And I figured out it wasn't me, it was just them. And I've kind of figured out that I think I'm in the second stage right now. And I feel like I've learned that I am enough and I'm confident in my own personality and everything like that. Um, and then one thing is just when you're talking to your kids, I have in big letters on my notes, suggestions are bet and options are better than advice because if I just with my parents, I just need someone to listen to me. I'm like because I love my friends, but I'm not gonna go talk to them about like, oh my God, like she didn't invite me to her party, like because they are friends with the other person. So with your parents, I think it's really just listening to your kid. And sometimes we don't always want advice. Sometimes we just need to talk it out with someone without actually having a respondent and just figuring it out for ourselves. Um, so then kind of like who do I want to be as the second stage question and like kind of like looking towards the future. Literally just this week, um, people were talking about college because the AP registration exam came out and people were like, "Oh, I'm taking this AP. Oh, I want to go to this college." And like the recruiting process has started sophomore year for people, and it's like, "Oh my God, I have to get all A's or else I'm not getting into a college." So I can't speak for like seniors or anything like that, but that college talk is something in sophomore year and I'm very stressed out about that because I've always known that I wanted to do something in law, but one thing about MA is that they have a really great science program, and I've kind of found this love of science at MA. So now I feel like that conflict in my own life and kind of just like, wait, do I want to be a lawyer? What am I looking for in the future? And kind of like envisioning that life. So I think that was another really great point that Jeff brought up is like that's when like now we're starting to think about who we want to be and like kind of yeah, like this romanticized version of our adulthood because I feel like at least for me, I don't really think about like the flaws. I just think about like where I want to be. Um, and then oh, one other thing that I really think that how you can support your kids is when they're drawn towards something is support them. I've had a lot of interests throughout my thing, and as my parents will probably testify to, I go through different phases of different things. Like I had a huge Taylor Swift phase, and my parents took me to her concert, and that was the best thing ever. Right now, I'm going through like a women's basketball phase, and my parents took me to the Valkyries game. So it's kind of like just these things of supporting your kids, no matter even if they will, you know, they will move on eventually, is just creating those memories and just if it might not be their hobbies right now, it's their goals for life is like if like me, I want to go into law, like seeing if you can get them to do a class about law and like educating them and helping them learn about that. I'm on my last page, but I think the last stage commitment I can't really talk about because I don't have a job. I'm not an adult yet, but I mean, I feel like I do think about the question, am I ready for kind of like the bigger world yet? And as much as I want to be out of high school and go to college right now, I don't think I'm ready. I think I still need a few years of experience, but I mean, my parents support me in the best way they can, and so yeah.
Awesome.
Vanessa, that was awesome. I want to thank you for not just sharing your thoughts, but I think being really vulnerable and sharing your experiences because it not only sort of confirmed what Jeff shared with us. Thank you, Jeff, you were right, but brought it to life right? In a really like relevant, real way. And I see lots of people applauding you who I think agree that hearing that from you, yeah, that just makes it all very real. So thank you. Um, I am going to open this up for questions and answers in just a moment, but before we do that, um, we always do a post workshop survey, excuse me. We're going to put a link to that in the chat now. We really want everybody to stay for questions, but those of you who have to filter off, it will be there for you. And the other thing I want to say is we are celebrating the holidays and gathering and looking forward to 2026, where we're going to continue to always offer our services at Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships totally free of charge. The fact that you all show up for your kids and show up in community is gift enough. And if you believe in this work and if you believe and have the means to contribute locally, there's so much to contribute to right now. But if you're invested locally in your kids and your neighbors and your local schools, and you have the means and feel compelled, then it is that season of giving. And we're going to put a link in the chat as well. You are what sustains the work. You sustain the work if you're able to give. And if you're not, you sustain the work by showing up to these talks and putting in the work with your kids and your community. So either way, thank you so much. We so appreciate you and this village that we formed here. And with that, we are going to head over to our question and answer. I have a ton, but I'm going to open it up to the floor before mine. You can either just come off of mute. I can't see everybody, but you can come on off of mute and ask a question. You can also put questions into the chat. They can be for Jeff, they can be for Vanessa, they can be for both. And we can get started. And if people feel timid, I will ask my questions. Okay, I'm gonna ask one of my questions. And this is actually for both of you because you Jeff, you talked about this third voice, and then Vanessa, you really confirmed it with that tennis example that made me crack up. I still won't listen to my mom on certain things, but will listen to somebody else. So the third voice is so important. And sometimes we're in a position lucky enough to have somebody like you, Jeff, to be the third voice. But for those of us who can't engage in that, who are those reliable third voices, and how do we get our kids to think about who they might be so they can access those third voices? Jeff, I can start with you.
Yeah, Jack, I mean, it's a question I get asked pretty often, right? And so part of it is you can't start thinking about this soon enough. You just think in terms of, if you have a child who struggled in school in one way or another, and maybe you tried different schools, you had to move different, you know what it's like when you finally get that teacher who's the right teacher. And all of a sudden your child just like is happy to go to school and that stuff. So I always think, who are adults who can be in their life, who you come across, who you'd like them to be in your son or daughter's life. And sometimes it happens organically. You have a neighbor. We actually had a neighbor who lives about 5 doors up from us during the pandemic who just took my younger one under her wing. And it's fantastic. We had a ed consultant who worked with our older one, who my daughter just adores and still calls her to this day. And this woman's like 70 years old, and they call and they chat, and I just get the bill. I'm happy that they talk, right? Um, but I sometimes you orchestrate it is what happens, where you have somebody in your world who you just think, I really wish my son could talk to you or my daughter could talk to you, and you just say to them, would you be willing to, can I get my daughter to take you out to lunch? We'll pay for it, like, just so that she can talk to you, or we're going to have you over for dinner one night, and I'm going to make sure that he's sitting here, and I want you to just at some moment, pull him aside and talk to him a little bit, tell him a little your story about how you got your business started and that stuff. And I've seen great success with this, where if you tell your teenager, like, I want you to meet this person, depending on your relationship with them, depending on the temperament of your child, they're either going to be excited about it or they're going to reject it. But when you sort of manufacture it to just happen, it oftentimes works surprisingly well with that. So I think you start thinking, who are the people I'd really like to have be in their life, and how do you orchestrate that? When my older one graduated high school last year, she went to a boarding school for, I mean, it's like for rock climbers. She got totally into rock climbing. She literally went in 9 different countries rock climbing for high school. There were two of her teachers who I just thought, I want these women to stay in her life for the rest of her life. And when I finally met them at graduation, it's the first time I ever met them, I pulled both of them aside and I said, I want you in my daughter's life. And they said, we will do it. And to this day, they text and they, are there. So sometimes you just have to ask people to go over and above for you, and they'll actually do it for you.
That's
You have to
awesome.
think this way. Yeah.
That's awesome. Vanessa, you mentioned you're like a tennis coach. Are there other folks in your life who have been like third voices that you look to?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have any older siblings or anything like that. So one of my voices is my older cousin. Her name's Melanie. She's like old. She's like 27. She lives in Dallas and I like I go and visit her a lot and she's kind of like I just feel like I can call her anytime I want. And I just find that like it's definitely like older females in my life so my best friend's older sister also graduated MA and she's a sophomore at Stanford now and she's someone who I always feel like I can talk to. And then actually, funny enough, my neighbor also went to MA and she's a freshman at Wisconsin-Madison this year, and she was my carpool driver last year. And
Awesome.
every morning we would just debrief in the car, and it would be the best thing ever because she would give me all the advice on all my teachers and everything like that. So I've kind of like these like sibling bonds for me is kind of like something. And then also definitely coaches for tennis and for other sports and my teachers especially. Like I've had such amazing teachers.
Yeah.
Like my advisor at MA, he's great. I've had him as my advisor for um 2 years and he's also been my math teacher. So
Awesome. So some
he's
school
someone
embedded folks too. That's awesome. So, Jeff, I got a chat question direct to me that says, do you see a connection between each of the stages and reasons for risky behavior? So I think what that means is, do you see that in each of the stages, the phase or the place that a young person is connected to why they might engage in substances or unsafe sexual practices or the shoplifting you mentioned? Like, is there some alignment that you see there? Or
The answer, my answer is that it can be, but it's not exclusive of that. There are
Mhm.
certain people that they're just temperament, no matter when they were 3 years old, they were the ones who were, jumping off the swing set or whatever, right? They're just high risk type of people. You get, your child who has the type of ADD where they just seek things that are like high stimulation, high whatever, right? And it doesn't matter what age they are, that's just how they seems to be in life. I what I'd say where there's the correlation is that first stage of trying to fit in the social world and being far more susceptible to just doing what it takes to be cool and accepted and to use that high school girl, that 15-year-old girl in Florida who said to me to be relevant. You know,
right.
in that regard, yes, there is,
And
right?
do you see ways that parents can navigate that sort of stage one cool wanting to fit in through using?
Um, in terms of what with the substance use, is that what you were
Yeah,
saying?
like as parents, sort of how do we navigate that or help our kids navigate that?
I have
That
this
an if
meeting. I had a meeting with a 16-year-old yesterday. Boy, goes to Redwood. Okay, I have an office locally down in Mill Valley and stuff, and he says to me, "It's impossible to keep kids from trying substances." This is what he says to me. Okay, and I looked at him and I said, "It's interesting you say that because I actually was that guy who never I tried alcohol. I never had marijuana whatsoever in my life. And it became a joke to my clients later on about it because, and I said, actually, don't believe that that's true, what you're saying. I said, I think what you can influence people around is the idea that there is an if. It's an if thing. You can choose whether or not to do it. And you can educate starting at a very young age that the more any of these substances are designed to just be easy access, quick, quick effect, sweet, exciting, tasty, whatever, the more all they want to do is take over your life, right? So you can educate in that way, and you're going to watch friends around you who start doing this, and next thing you know, they're going to be hooked on it, putting zins in their mouth all day long, and you're going to hear about this, right? So you can start educating them ahead of time. This is what it's going to look like when you see people losing control, right? And I try to frame it in terms of like words like control, if it's choice, because these are power things. Like, how can you set your life up that you maintain the power in your life and you're not constantly giving your power away? So that's the way that I oftentimes will talk about it. It resonates. If anything, it seems to shorten the duration of how long they'll go through that stage if they are going to do it. So,
Absolutely. And when you originally were using words around like power and having control and like autonomy, that resonated from that substance perspective. We actually know that like the most successful anti-substance use campaigns for young people aren't that it's bad for your health. It's about power and control and not having somebody else or something else control you. And so I think that really that messaging for young people resonates across the board. Yeah.
the other example that I frequently use with my clients, I just shared this with a group of ninth grade boys yesterday, um, is once they've tried alcohol, they suddenly understand why so many people drink when they socialize because they stop being socially self-conscious. And I said to them, what you do then is you set your life up that you literally cannot go out and socialize with people unless you have a substance in your body. So you actually don't have power and control. You want to have power in your life. Learn how to be able to go talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime, as comfortably sober as you can do when you've been drinking. And they stare at me, look, that's not possible. And I go, I figured it out. It took me 9 years, but I figured out how to do it, you know, to be able to just go out there and do this stuff. But it's again, that's where you get power inside yourself. The moment I have to rely on the outside in, somebody to tell me I look good, tell me I'm an okay person, that means I'm also susceptible. If nobody tells me that, I'm going to feel bad, right? So the moment I need a substance in order to be able to talk or to be able to sleep at night, I give control and power away. So it's the language that I use. Power, control, agency, these are all aspirational terms, right? Which
And
we
is
know.
that connected? You talked about switching the like when speak to if speak,
Yes.
right? That's
Yep.
also about like
Yep.
choice.
Choice is power, right?
Choice is
Yeah.
power. That was the line. Choice is
Yeah.
power.
Yeah.
I like that. That might be my biggest takeaway tonight. Are there other questions or comments that are surfacing for either Jeff or Vanessa? Where you can come off mute, you can put them in the chat.
Jeff, I was just going to ask, I know we were talking about like the third voice and like other people
Yeah.
maybe having more of an influence on our kids, but like in regard to like exactly what you were just saying, like helping our kids to realize those things, do you think that's like an appropriate place for parents to come in, or should we be looking for like outside sources to kind of get that um, to them? And if so, like, is that something that's on your website, or do you have recommendations for places we can go to like expose our kids to kind of some of those ideas around?
To I just want to make sure I'm understanding to help our kids with what part of it that.
So like the 2 points you just made, one around that they're really being marketed to in a way that's trying to like manipulate and control them, and which I loved. And then the second one being, you want to learn to like be in the world and talk to people. So just kind of the two angles as far as substance use prevention goes. Asking as someone who works for this organization and someone with a teenager, I'm just curious what your take is. How effective can parents be?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm gonna step back and sort of repeat something that I said earlier. Is in this stage, the more we can equip them with skills, sophistication, social knowledge to be more savvy, the more confident, more secure, the less susceptible they will be towards doing these kinds of things, which will put them at a high risk. Okay. That is not going to apply to somebody who has a very strong addictive personality, is a thrill seeker, temperament, whatever. Right? I can't make a blanket statement. I can say in general, this is what will happen. So the more that we teach them. So I'll give a little anecdote, just a parent anecdote here. Last day of sixth grade last year, okay, this is where I'll probably embarrass my daughter, because I know there's at least one other Miller Creek parent on here because I saw them and they put their name up in the chat. My daughter's walking home from school with a couple of kids, and there's a boy, and he wants to kiss her. Okay, and this is the end of sixth grade. And his point is, we're not sixth graders anymore. This is part of his argument. Okay, and she's not ready for this stuff. Okay, and he's not pressuring her, not in whatever, but he's being playful. But So she tells him, "Oh, my mom told me that, you can't use up all your kisses too early," or, it's just like these silly kinds of things, right? And she comes home and I hear her telling the story to my older daughter who's 19 years old. And this is like Vanessa talking about not having the big sister in life. It's like telling the story, right? And I'm walking in out of the kitchen as the story's going on, okay? And so I had this moment where I stopped. Her name is Skylar. And so I stopped and I was like, "Sky?" And she's like, "What?" And I said, "It's 4 words." And she goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "It's 4 words." She goes, "What's the 4 words?" I said, "You just look at the kid, and you go, 'Sorry, dude, not happening.'" That's all you have to say, 4 words, right? So I was like, practice it, practice it, right? So it sounds like I'm giving her advice, okay? Because in a way I am giving her advice, but in my mind, what I'm doing is here's an opportunity at an age where it's innocent, it's harmless, there's no big stakes in the line. I can do it in a playful way. Her big sister's there who's going to laugh and agree with me to start teaching her when you're in a situation down the road where someone's trying to press you, whether it's someone trying to press you for sex or someone trying to get you to vape or do drugs or whatever, learning to have your voice, especially for a girl, to have your voice and be able to say it like that clear, whatever. We can't teach our kids that stuff starting soon enough or early enough or often enough.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much. Um, Vanessa, I got a question for you, and it's a question that's actually come up for other youth speakers, so it's interesting to see it come up multiple times. Have your parents done anything that's been particularly helpful to you as you navigate the teen years? Not to put you or your parents on the spot, but has there been anything that's been particularly helpful or supportive?
I mean, I have to say I probably have some of the best parents ever. I'm very, very lucky. I have the most supportive parents, and I think that really is the key is supporting them. And obviously, to support them, there are things you have to do. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but just listening, I think that really is the key to everything, is just kind of like listening to things and not immediately jumping in to like help. Like, obviously, if they need help, then do something. But I think Jeff was talking about this in the presentation is that if like in middle school you can just call the principal or something if your kid's struggling and be like my some kids aren't being nice to my kid. But I mean like my mom has probably even suggested she does that in like high school or middle school, and I'm just like no, like please don't do that. And it's like I love her and I know she wants to support me, but she always, and obviously she has this very protective instinct, but sometimes it's just like sometimes I want to be able to handle it on my own. So I think it's kind of finding that balance in between helping them and also letting them figure it out by themselves, and whether that be just listening to them, offering your advice. And I think one thing that's really been valuable for me is having my parents share their perspectives or kind of having them share their experience like Jeff was talking about is like now that I'm older, my parents will talk about kind of like their high school experiences or like what's going on in their lives like right now. Like my mom will share her experiences with her friends and kind of like if it's something relatable to me. And it just kind of makes me feel a little bit better knowing that people still go through it even when they're older and not just in high school.
Yeah. Thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate that. It's hard sometimes as parents to just listen, but I'm gonna really remember just listen sometimes, right?
It's
Awesome.
it's hard also a lot of times as parents to not get caught up in fear.
Yes.
Right. And the opposite of getting caught up in fear is try to stand about 10 years out in their future and just think about like what are all the experiences that's going to help them get to this amazing life that they're capable of. And at what point do it, me letting them just stumble and fall was the best thing. I saw somebody put a thing in the chat about when you have a child that doesn't really open up much and doesn't talk much. I'll give you another little like, trick of the trade or whatever is watching TV shows with them and then commenting and having conversations about the characters in the shows.
Yeah.
And even if your child's not opening up that much and talking to you, just having the conversations with your spouse over dinner where they're hearing the things that are going on. Because the more you can do it in a way that's relatable to them, the more likely when the time comes that they will speak to you, that they'll talk to you because they'll understand that you really get it at that point. So
Thanks. Thanks, Jeff. Vanessa here in the main chat, I think everyone can see it. It says, Vanessa, when do you find that you open up to your parents the most? Is there a certain time or a place that you find you're willing to talk and share more with your parents? I think that's related to sort of what Jeff had to say too.
I think the time that I'm most willing to talk to my parents is kind of when I come to see them or I come seeking them out because I think that obviously my parents will kind of like check in about my day during dinner and stuff like that. But I'm not someone who feels like the dinner table is the best place to share things.
Mm.
I think the time that I kind of like open up to my mom at least the most is I'll kind of like for some reason it's always at night and it's kind of like before she's about to go to bed, I'll kind of just come like crash her in her bed and I'll just kind of just like start talking about like something that I'm like really just want her to listen to. And so I just feel like it's kind of like just like kind of like a safe space. Like it's normally in the house or sometimes because I live in the city, so it's a commute to school. Like sometimes when my parents are picking me up, it's like I'll come or I'll talk to them on the car ride on the way home. So it's kind of just like those little moments that maybe there's like not anything really going on and it's just kind of like a silence. And then sometimes I feel like I'll just bring it up if I'm seeking them out or something like that. I think is probably the time I open up to them.
Yep. Thanks, Vanessa. I think that nighttime thing, I saw a lot of nods. I think there's something about getting ready for bed and being in our PJs, and we're all a little more vulnerable maybe in the evenings. And then that car time, sort of a captive audience, right? Great.
and I can't emphasize enough how critical as a parent it is how you respond when they do open up. That you don't get judgmental, you don't get critical, you don't start lecturing, you don't start whatever, you just do a lot of listening.
Or listening.
For me, a lot of it is walking the dog with my daughter at night
Nice.
and just listening,
Quiet moments.
and then deciding what I'm going to comment on and when and how.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, we do have a couple more minutes if there's any final questions out there.
Jeff, I was wondering how this applies to tweens as well as teens. What are they going through before they hit that stage one at 12?
Thanks, Pamela. Great question.
Yeah, and as I said, typically I see this stuff shows up at puberty, and there's absolutely exceptions to it because a lot of it is how much kids are exposed to typically through media or older siblings at a young age. When I meet, a 10-year-old whose parents are letting them watch, these shows that are designed for teenagers, and especially if the culture around them is sexualizing them at a younger age is something I see quite often. You'll start to hear kids talking about who likes who, even though they're in fourth grade, and making like you know snooty comments about how somebody looks or whatever, things that I would never have expected to hear from people before they were about 14 years old. I'll start hearing it in 10-year-olds and stuff. A lot of that, though, is really just cultural influence. I don't think it's just natural brain development type of stuff. It's sort of more the micro of where do they go to school, what's that community like, and how competitive are people, what comments are they hearing parents making, how much are kids influenced by their older siblings and that stuff. Naturally, on its own, it doesn't tend to happen at that age. In fact, I'd say with girls, the breaking off age is seventh grade. That's where they go from everybody just being friends to just all hell breaks loose and excluding people, whatever. Boys, it tends to be about a year after that when it starts really happening, where I see it the most, by eighth grade, ninth grade. So the journey to them learning how to find the right people, find their confidence, find their voice and stuff. It's a tough journey, but once they get it, they're on solid ground. So
That's an awesome, hopeful message. So we're going to take our final question is here in the comment box, actually, and it's, I've heard that when driving your kids and their friends somewhere, that you as the parent should just listen, and not interject or participate, as that's when you can learn what is going on with them and how they are in their world. Do you agree with this?
Well, I definitely would because depending on the personality of your child, you're going to see how they are with their friends, and their friends don't have the filter in front of you that your own kid may have. So you definitely hear, you hear the personalities, you hear the stories, you hear things that otherwise might not have been said to you. um, I just keep emphasizing, it's like Vanessa is sharing, like she's really open, sounds like particularly with her mom. You can be a parent who they'll be open and talk to all the way through their life, as long as you continue to be a person that they don't feel is judging them, judging their friends and dismissing them and belittling or, not honoring the things that are important to them. You can go on being somebody who they'll continue to talk to, beyond just the car. But yeah, absolutely. It's a phenomenal time to listen in.
Oh gosh. Okay, this is a really good question. We're going to sneak it in. Even though I am looking at the time, it's a great question. Can you touch on the biggest differences of social puberty in middle school, boys versus girls, or gender differences, non-binary, etc.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
gender
Well,
differences.
I'm just going to stick with the way the question was framed up front because I do see, girls, generally speaking, it has to do with discovering their sexuality, and the power of their sexuality is where you tend to see it really starts to show up. So there'll be a lot of separating themselves out by, whether boys are going to be into them or not, comparing their bodies and their looks to one another. Envy and jealousy of people who are more talented, whether it's not just looks, it's also someone has a better voice or whatever. There's a lot of like this comparison stuff. The boys, what I would say tends to happen in the middle school years, my biggest observation is they're just not sensitive to one another. So it isn't necessarily going out of their way to be cruel and cold and, like exclude somebody from a group. It's just not even thinking like, oh, we didn't invite that kid to it. Whereas the girls will tend to do it on purpose and it's a power game that's going on. The boys just don't even realize they're being a complete jerk to somebody. Now, there's lots of exceptions to that. I had a middle school in Benicia a couple of years ago. The principal hired me to come out there because he had a bunch of kids who were just being complete, whatever, and kicking in the door when a sixth grader in the bathroom and that stuff, whatever. So there is, some of the kids just being like total jerks, whatever. But a lot of with boys are just not particularly sensitive to it, and they don't even realize that they're hurting their friend by making fun of them about something or other. It's a sad stereotype, but it's true. A lot of boys have a hard time being vulnerable and sharing and expressing, so they just don't even know it. And that's just I'm making huge generalities here, but it is absolutely the most common stuff that I see. So
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for asking that question. That was a great question. And I wish we had more time. We're going to end there. I want to thank you, Jeff and Vanessa, so much for being with us. And thank you all for being with us.